Hey there, welcome back to the Jesus, Jewels, and Justice podcast. This week on the show, we'll be discussing what the church's response should be to injustices in America. So without any further ado, this is going to be a really good conversation, so let's get on with it. How should the evangelical community respond to injustices in today's society, especially in racial injustices and racial inequalities? Well, number one, I think we should look for a precedent in Scripture. And we can look at Isaiah chapter 58, for example, where the Israelites are fasting and praying for God to heal their land and help them, but they're doing it the wrong way. They're neglecting the poor. They're not standing up for the needy. They're not helping one another. And so God sends a message to the people through the prophet Isaiah. And basically what he says is, your prayers and your fast I don't hear because you're neglecting the poor and the needy, but true worship to me is helping the least of these. And then James echoes this in James chapter 1, verse 27. And then I really want to highlight Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 through 9, which says, open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth and judge righteously. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy. So now we have some sort of scriptural basis for how we should respond to these instances wherein people are hurting, no matter what sort of background they have, whatever the injustice to them was. The church needs to look to scripture to see how they should respond to these issues. The second thing that the church should do is confront sin and lament injustice. So for example, in the Psalms that David writes, for example, all the time he's lamenting and asking God, where are you? I'm hurting, I'm in pain, these people are trying to kill me. But yet David, at each of the end of his Psalms, declares that you are my Lord, and I will put my trust in you, for you are my rocks. And similar to that, the church needs to recognize the sins of this nation and the injustices against some of these people and lament that. That's not necessarily to say that the church should complain about these things, but true lament is grieving over these things and then asking God, this nation is hurting. And then at the end of your plea to God, give thanks because He is God and He is the Lord. I think too that realizing that the church played a large role in the injustices in America is also an essential part, and learning from the past mistakes that we've made helps us find solutions for the future. Number 3 is to have conversations with people that are unlike you. So finding common ground is definitely more helpful than having arguments or having fights with the opposite sides. Building relationships with people that are unlike you is also important. And so for believers, having conversations across denominations as well is helpful. And so that flows right into the last point, that we should put politics aside and come together as the church. So we need to fight for justice, not just for the unborn, right? But for all people that are made in the image of God, no matter if they're white or black, or if they're from whatever country that's not America. And so we should do so with love and with truth. And so there's a distinction there that we need to have. If you have all truth, you lack love, and that's bad, and that turns people away. On the opposite side, if you have all love, that means that you're not portraying so much truth, and that's also bad, which means that sometimes can excuse wrongdoing. So that's a distinction we need to make when we're having these conversations. So in conclusion with this, we've now hopefully answered the question, what should the church's response be to injustices? We've established that all people are made in God's image, and that we should mourn when God's image bearers, which means us, are suffering. And I think as well, the last thing I'm going to say about this is that it's all well and good to pray and to mourn and to do all of these things, but at the end, we need to do something. There needs to be action behind that faith that God is going to change something behind that prayer. There's so much more that I could say about this topic, but that'll have to be saved for another episode. So I'd like to thank all of you guys for listening. to this episode of Jesus, Jules, and Justice. Come back next week for another episode. Thank you, and God bless.